The automatic doors slide open with a soft whoosh, revealing a grand showroom filled with pristine private jets. Gleaming under the bright showroom lights, each aircraft is displayed like a trophy, a symbol of wealth, exclusivity, and power. The air smells of polished leather, fresh carpeting, and the faint tang of jet fuel from the nearby runway. But when Thomas steps inside, the energy shifts. The well-dressed clients and sleek sales staff glance up from their conversations, their laughter fading as their eyes land on him. For a moment, the room is silent, just the soft hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of a plane taking off outside. Thomas is used to the weight of judgment. It's nothing new. His calloused hands, darkened by years of tending his land, clench at his sides. His flannel shirt is neatly tucked in, his jeans clean, but the mud still clings to the soles of his boots, a reminder of where he comes from. He walks forward, head held high. This is it, the day he makes his dream a reality. He has spent years working his fields, building his business from the ground up. Early mornings, late nights, sweat, sacrifice. It has all led to this moment. A lifetime of effort has finally put him in a position to own his own jet. No more commercial flights, no more waiting on schedules dictated by others. The ability to fly on his terms, to take his family, his team, his business to new heights. But as he moves deeper into the showroom, the stares don't stop. A woman in a fitted designer dress leans in to whisper to her companion. A man in a tailored suit furrows his brow, as if trying to make sense of why someone like him is here. And then the first words. "What's he doing here?" a voice mutters from the side. "He looks lost," another snickers. The words are quiet, but they aren't meant to be unheard. Thomas doesn't react. He's dealt with ignorance before. He stops in front of a sleek silver jet, its exterior smooth and reflective. This is the one. The perfect fit for his business, his vision. He reaches out, letting his fingers graze the cool metal, feeling the weight of this moment. Then a voice cuts through the silence. "Can I help you?" The tone isn't welcoming. It isn't curious. It's doubtful. Thomas turns to see a young salesman standing there, arms crossed, his neatly pressed suit fitting him like a second skin. He wears a name tag, Greg, the kind of man who has probably spent his career selling to CEOs, oil barons, and tech moguls. Greg's lips twist into something resembling a smirk. He gives Thomas a once-over, from his dusty boots to his weathered hands. "You sure you're in the right place?" A chuckle from behind. Another glance from a nearby couple. Thomas meets Greg's eyes, his expression steady. "I'm here to buy a jet." Silence. Greg's smirk grows. "Oh," he says slowly, as if humoring a child. "You want to buy a jet?" Thomas nods. Another chuckle, this time from a group of businessmen gathered by the coffee station. One of them, a middle-aged man with slicked-back silver hair, mutters something to his companion. Greg sighs dramatically, tilting his head. "Well, sir, I should warn you. These aren't exactly cheap." A soft, mocking laugh escapes from somewhere behind them. "I know what they cost," Thomas says. Greg raises an eyebrow. "I see. Well, most of our clients schedule appointments before looking at aircraft, but I suppose I can give you some information." The words are polished, professional, but the meaning is clear. "I don't believe you belong here." Greg doesn't lead Thomas toward the jet. Instead, he lets the silence drag out, waiting for him to turn around, to realize his mistake, to quietly leave and save everyone the discomfort of pretending he belongs here. But Thomas doesn't move. Instead, he takes a step closer to the jet, his fingers still resting on the metal. "I want to know the specs on this one," he says firmly. Greg blinks, as if surprised that Thomas is still entertaining the idea. "All right," Greg says slowly, before clearing his throat. "This model is a state-of-the-art mid-sized jet, seats up to 9 passengers. Custom interior, full leather, full bar, top-tier avionics." His words trail off as he watches Thomas, as if expecting him to nod along blankly, as if the words are just noise to someone who clearly couldn't afford to be here. "Range?" Thomas asks. Greg blinks again. Excuse me? The range, Thomas repeats. What's the range per fuel tank and the engine model? There's a pause. The businessmen at the coffee station stop their quiet chuckles. Greg straightens slightly. Well, it's a Pratt & Whitney turbofan, range is about 3,400 nautical miles, but I don't... And what's the cruising speed? Greg hesitates. His mouth opens slightly, then closes again. 500 knots, he answers. Thomas nods. Good. Now, what's the financing structure? What terms do you offer for independent buyers versus corporate purchases? The smirk on Greg's face begins to fade. A couple standing nearby shifts uncomfortably. Thomas waits. Greg clears his throat. Well, Greg says, his tone suddenly a little less cocky. Typically, we, structure payments over a fixed term, but most serious buyers... He pauses. The insult is obvious. Thomas tilts his head. I see, he says simply. Greg looks increasingly uncomfortable. He glances toward his colleagues as if expecting someone to step in and end this charade. But Thomas isn't done. I'd like to see the interior, he says. A sharp inhale from someone nearby. Greg hesitates. Sir, we normally reserve... I said I want to see the interior. Greg glances at the manager across the room, who's been watching the exchange unfold. The older man gives a slight nod, but his face is unreadable. Greg sighs, rubbing the back of his neck. Fine, he says, turning toward the aircraft. Thomas follows. The room, once filled with murmurs and quiet laughter, is now heavy with something else entirely, a slow realization, a crack in the facade, because Thomas isn't walking away. And for the first time, Greg, and everyone else in the showroom, is starting to wonder if they've made a mistake. Greg hesitates at the base of the aircraft stairs, his polished shoes tapping lightly against the floor. He doesn't move immediately, instead glancing toward his manager, as if looking for an excuse to stop this ridiculous charade. Thomas, however, remains patient. He stands firm, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The years of hard work, of dealing with skepticism, of fighting for respect in spaces where people didn't expect to see him, none of this is new. Finally, Greg exhales sharply through his nose, as if reluctantly giving in to a child's stubborn request. Fine, he mutters. I suppose we can do a quick walkthrough. With exaggerated professionalism, he gestures toward the aircraft door and starts climbing the short flight of stairs, his back stiff with reluctance. Thomas follows, his boots heavy against the steps, leaving faint traces of dust against the spotless metal. Inside, the jet is as pristine as expected. Polished mahogany panels gleam under soft ambient lighting. The seats, upholstered in hand-stitched Italian leather, are arranged spaciously around an elegant cabin, complete with a built-in bar and a state-of-the-art entertainment system. Greg turns, forcing a tight-lipped smile, his hands clasped together in front of him. As you can see, this aircraft features a fully customized interior, he begins, slipping back into his well-rehearsed sales pitch. Premium sound system, touchscreen controls for cabin settings, and, of course, a handcrafted finish designed for comfort and style. Thomas walks past him without a word, running his fingers along the polished wood, feeling the craftsmanship beneath his fingertips. Greg watches him closely, eyes narrowing slightly. You know, most buyers prefer to customize their jets, he says, trying to regain control of the conversation. We don't usually see people walking in ready to make a purchase without some consultation first. Thomas lets out a low hum, barely acknowledging the remark. I like it as it is, he says simply. Greg chuckles, but there's no real humor in it, more like discomfort. Right, he says, rubbing the back of his neck. Well, the price tag on this model starts at $25 million. Fully loaded, you're looking at about 30. His tone is casual, but his eyes are watching, waiting for some sign of hesitation, a flinch, a pause, the inevitable realization that this purchase is beyond reach. But Thomas simply nods. Good, he says. Let's talk numbers. The silence that follows is deafening. Greg's confident smirk flickers for the first time. uncertainty creeping into his posture. He glances toward the cockpit, as if searching for a way out of this conversation. "You mean, seriously?" Thomas looks at him with steady eyes. "You think I'm playing?" Greg laughs, but this time it's forced. "Sir, with all due respect, this is a high-end aircraft," he says, his words slow and deliberate, as if trying to gently steer a lost child back in the right direction. "Most of our buyers go through extensive financial verification before discussing—" "You didn't ask those guys outside for financial verification," Thomas interrupts, his voice calm but firm. Greg stiffens. The truth is hanging between them now, undeniable and suffocating. Before Greg can form an excuse, a new voice cuts through the tension. "Thomas!" A tall, sharply dressed man strides into the jet's cabin. His suit is crisp, his leather shoes shining under the cabin lights. His eyes, warm with recognition, light up as he steps forward. "Well, damn," the man grins. "Didn't expect to see you here." Thomas turns, his face breaking into the first genuine smile of the day. "James," he says, shaking the man's hand firmly. Greg watches, his expression shifting rapidly from irritation to confusion. James turns to Greg with a polite but pointed smile. "You helping my guy here?" Greg hesitates. James glances between the two men, his brow furrowing slightly as he picks up on the tension hanging thick in the air. "You two know each other?" he asks, looking at Thomas. Thomas lets out a slow breath, his eyes flickering toward Greg before returning to James. "Not really," he says, "but he's been helpful." James doesn't miss the edge in Thomas's tone. His expression darkens slightly as he turns back to Greg. "You work here?" James asks. Greg straightens. "Yes, sir, I do." "And what exactly was the problem here?" Greg stammers for a second, caught between conflicting responses. "There was no problem," he says finally, clearing his throat. "We just needed to verify some details before proceeding." James folds his arms, his gaze unwavering. "Right. And let me guess, you didn't assume he could afford the jet when he walked in?" Greg's jaw tightens. The weight of James's words and the obvious truth behind them settles over the cabin. James turns back to Thomas. "You actually looking to buy today?" "Yeah," Thomas nods. "I was." James doesn't miss the past tense. "You serious?" "As serious as I was the second I walked in," Thomas replies evenly. James exhales through his nose, shaking his head. "You got the cash ready?" Thomas reaches into his pocket, pulling out a folded check. Greg watches, his face pale, as Thomas unfolds the paper and holds it up. The amount printed on it is more than enough. The room falls into dead silence. Greg stares at the check like it's something foreign, something impossible. James lets out a slow whistle. "Well, well," he says, "looks like we've got a buyer." Greg swallows hard. "Sir, But Thomas folds the check in half, tucking it back into his pocket. "Not from you," he says. Greg flinches as if the words physically strike him. "You think I'm going to spend my money in a place that treated me like I was wasting their time?" Thomas asks, his voice calm but sharp. "You think I'm going to hand over $30 million to a man who only took me seriously after he saw a check?" Greg's lips part slightly, but no words come out. Thomas turns back to James. "You know another dealer?" James smirks. "Oh, I know plenty." "Good." Thomas turns on his heel and heads for the exit. Greg just stands there, frozen. By the time Thomas and James leave the showroom, the air inside is thick with something far heavier than silence. And Greg, for the first time in his career, realizes he may have just lost the biggest sale of his life. The story of what happened at the showroom spreads like wildfire. At first it's just murmurs, private conversations in business circles, quiet discussions over drinks at upscale lounges, but soon it's out in the open. A black farmer, a self-made man, humiliated at an aircraft showroom, not taken seriously, mocked, dismissed, until he revealed he had the money to buy the very jet they thought he could never afford. And when they realized their mistake, when they saw the check, it was too late. Thomas wasn't interested in proving himself to them anymore. He took his business elsewhere. A few days later, the first article appears. A local business columnist writes about the incident, detailing how systemic biases seep into even the highest levels of sales. The article doesn't mention the showroom by name, but it doesn't have to. Anyone in the industry recognizes the description. Then the comments start rolling in. People share their own experiences, stories of being underestimated, of being judged by their clothes, their background, their skin color. The conversation grows. A journalist reaches out to Thomas. At first, he hesitates. He's never been one to seek the spotlight. But then he thinks about it, thinks about how many others have been through the same thing, but never had the platform to call it out. He agrees to an interview. The article drops a week later, and this time the showroom is named. The headline is bold, impossible to ignore. Luxury jet dealer, accused of racial bias after humiliating black farmer who came to buy private jet. The impact is immediate. The showroom's PR team scrambles to control the damage, releasing a carefully worded statement about how they value all customers and take concerns of discrimination very seriously. But no one is buying it. The public isn't interested in hollow apologies. They want action. Greg, the salesman who had dismissed Thomas, suddenly finds himself at the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. His name starts circulating in industry circles, and his reputation takes a hit. Some clients begin requesting different sales reps, not wanting to be associated with someone facing such allegations. It gets worse when another former customer, a black entrepreneur, comes forward with a similar story. Then another, and another. The accusations stack up. Pressure mounts on the company to take action, and eventually they do. Greg is fired. But for Thomas, it was never about getting someone fired. It was about something bigger, and that's when the lawsuit is filed. The legal team, led by Marcus, builds a solid case. They don't just focus on what happened to Thomas. They highlight a pattern of behavior, pulling in testimonies from others who face the same discrimination. The case isn't just about a single incident. It's about accountability. The trial is public, and it draws even more attention. Social media explodes with discussions about race and wealth, privilege and bias. Some people tried to defend the showroom, arguing that salespeople have the right to be skeptical of anyone walking in. But the counter-argument is simple. Why wasn't everyone treated with that same skepticism? Why was Thomas judged before he even spoke? The evidence is overwhelming. The recorded testimonies, the statements from other customers, the pattern of discrimination, it all paints a damning picture. In the final ruling, the judge doesn't hold back. The company is found guilty of discriminatory practices. They're fined heavily and ordered to implement anti-bias training. But that's not all. The judge also mandates a public apology, one that must be published across major platforms, acknowledging their wrongdoing and committing to real change. When the statement is finally released, it's filled with corporate language and damage control tactics, but at its core, it admits what Thomas had known from the moment he walked into that showroom. They never saw him as a real customer, and now the world knows it too. But Thomas isn't done yet. A few weeks later, he steps into another aircraft showroom, not the one that disrespected him. He would never give them a dime. This time, he's at their competitor's dealership. Here, he's met with something entirely different. Respect, professionalism, no judgmental glances, no skeptical looks. Just a team that treats him like what he is, a serious buyer. He finalizes the deal for his jet, a different model, but just as sleek, just as powerful. As the papers are signed and the final handshake is exchanged, he glances toward the entrance, where a few curious onlookers recognize him. Some of them work for the original showroom. Their faces are tight with discomfort, realizing what they lost. Thomas smiles slightly but says nothing. They made their choice the moment they dismissed him, and he made his. A week later, the jet is ready. The sunlight gleams off its polished exterior as Thomas boards, Marcus walking beside him. He settles into the leather seat, running his fingers over the armrest. The aircraft hums with quiet power, waiting to lift off into the sky. As the jet ascends, Thomas looks down at the land below, land he once worked tirelessly with his bare hands. They had laughed at the idea of a black farmer owning a private jet. They aren't laughing now. Because this isn't just about a jet. This is about rewriting the rules, about proving that no one, not a salesman, not a company, not a room full of skeptics, gets to decide what someone else is capable of. And as he soars above the world that once tried to keep him in his place, Thomas knows one thing for certain. They will never underestimate him again. The sky stretches endlessly above, a vast expanse of blue interrupted only by wisps of white clouds. The engines hum beneath him, steady and strong, carrying him higher, further, beyond the limits that others had once tried to impose. Thomas sits comfortably in the plush leather seat of his new jet, his hands resting lightly on the armrests. The sensation is surreal, not just the aircraft itself, not just the luxury of it all, but what it represents. For so long, he had been made to feel like he belonged to the ground, a man of the earth, bound by the soil, by expectations, by an unspoken rule that people like him weren't supposed to reach this high, weren't supposed to fly. And yet, here he is. From his window, he can see the world stretch beneath him, the miles of farmland, the highways weaving through small towns, the rivers carving their paths through the land, his land, the land he had built his life upon, the land that had fed his family, the land that had given him everything he needed to stand where he is today. And now it no longer binds him, it lifts him. Across from him, Marcus studies a document, flipping through its pages with quiet concentration. His son, the man who had stood beside him through the entire battle, who had fought not just for justice but for respect. Marcus glances up and catches Thomas watching him. He raises an eyebrow, smirking slightly. "You're still thinking about it, aren't you?" Thomas exhales, shaking his head. "You mean the lawsuit?" "No," Marcus replies. "The moment. That damn moment in that showroom." Thomas chuckles, but it's a knowing laugh, one that holds layers of memory and reflection. "I don't think I'll ever forget it," he admits. "Good," Marcus says, leaning forward, "because you weren't just proving something to them. You were proving something to yourself." Thomas considers that. He knows his son is right. It wasn't about making a statement, about shaming those who had doubted him. It was about breaking through the last invisible barrier that had stood in his way. He had nothing left to prove, not to them, not to anyone. But as the jet glides smoothly through the sky, he realizes something important. This is bigger than him. He isn't the first to have walked into a room and been dismissed before he even spoke. He isn't the first to have been judged by the calluses on his hands instead of the work he had done with them. And he won't be the last. That thought settles in his chest, heavier than the altitude pressing against the cabin. Because the truth is, there will always be another Thomas, another man, another woman, another person who walks into a room full of people who have already decided their worth before they even open their mouth. And maybe, just maybe, his story will give them the strength to do what he did, to stand tall, to make them listen, to not back down. He turns back to the window, watching as the world unfolds below, and he makes a silent vow. This isn't the end of the fight. There is still work to be done. The jet touches down on the private airstrip, the wheels kissing the ground with precision. As the door opens and the stairs lower, a familiar sight awaits him. His family, standing in the golden afternoon light, waiting to welcome him home. His wife is the first to step forward. There's something in her eyes, a quiet pride, an understanding that words can't quite capture. "You did it," she says softly, squeezing his hand. Thomas doesn't respond right away. He simply looks around at his children, at his grandchildren, at the people who have always believed in him, even when the rest of the world didn't. And then finally he smiles. "I didn't do it alone." They walk together toward the house, the smell of home-cooked food drifting through the air, the voices of loved ones filling the space around him. It's a simple moment, but it's everything. Later that evening, as the sun sets and the house is filled with laughter and warmth, Marcus stands up, clearing his throat. "I think we should all take a moment to acknowledge something," he says, glancing around the room. "This isn't just about a plane. This isn't just about a lawsuit. This is about respect, about making sure that when people like us walk into a room, we aren't ignored or questioned or belittled. This is about making sure that we never let anyone tell us where we belong." A murmur of agreement spreads through the room. Thomas looks at his son, his heart swelling with pride. Marcus raises his glass. "To Dad." A chorus follows. "To Thomas." "To justice." "To never backing down." Glasses clink together, and for the first time in a long time, Thomas feels something settle deep in his chest. Not anger, not frustration, peace. But outside these walls, beyond this home, beyond this family, he knows the world still has a long way to go. And he knows that stories like his, battles like his, need to be told. Because if he had walked out of that showroom without a word, if he had let them push him out, let them convince him that he didn't belong, then they would have been right. And he refuses to let that happen to the next person. So as he sits back, listening to the voices of his family, feeling the warmth of everything he has built, he makes a decision. He won't stop here. This is just the beginning, because for every Thomas that comes after him, he will make sure they never have to fight this battle alone.